So, welcome back again, and so welcome back again. In this section, we will start in discussing some of the key security principles, and we will start first by identifying or defining what is the objective of security. So basically, when we ask anyone to define what is a security, so security refers to protection from different threats, including unauthorized access, disclosure, alteration, or destruction. The goal of security is to maintain three objectives. First one is to maintain the confidentiality of information. Second one is to maintain the integrity of the information. And third one is to maintain the availability of the information. With having all of these functions or all of these protection together, we can assure the level of security. We can achieve what is known as security assurance. And when we look to what could be the threats that could impact the confidentiality, it could be unauthorized access to the system or disclosing sensitive information. This could impact the confidentiality. Confidentiality is about keeping the secret, keeping the data accessible only by authorized individuals. While integrity refers to keeping data accurate. When we talk about integrity, we talk about risks that could be related to data alteration, data destruction, or having some kind of misuse or abuse with data. All of these are some of the integrity risk. And in our security, or when we design security solutions or controls, we need to consider as well the controls that may protect data integrity. For example, in databases, we might consider the concurrency controls, which can provide sort of assurance that when someone is trying to deal with, let's say, a portion of data inside database, there will be a kind of lock or a kind of isolation between different transactions. So we will make sure no transaction will overwrite the other, for example. So this is the integrity aspect, and using security controls, we can achieve the integrity in multiple ways. One of the techniques, of course, is the digital signature, which is about ensuring or, let's say, validating the communicators in a communication process, like validating myself to you and you validating yourself to me. So we are achieving here the validation and the integrity of the communication. We can rest assured that you are communicating with the right individual. For availability, we might not talk about some security or cybersecurity related threats only, but the risk of having a power disruption. In that case, we might consider different availability domains or availability zones inside our data center. The risk of single point of failure, so we might consider clustering or having some sort of high availability setup, active standby, or redundancy. So the objective of security is to achieve the CIA Triad, achieve the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So in basic term, confidentiality is about authorizing the authorized subject only to view the data, while integrity is to make sure that systems are protected against the unauthorized modification or destruction, and no unauthorized change can happen, although or unless this change is authorized, and no one can deny what he applied on the system, and the business can validate the authenticity of the data at any point of time. This is about what do we mean by integrity. And regarding availability, availability refer to that data or systems are accessible anytime to the authorized individuals or people who should access the systems. So confidentiality, integrity, and availability, or by having CIA Triad, or by having these three objectives met, you can guarantee the security assurance and the overall trust in your digital system. And when you have data secure and when you have security assurance, you can guarantee the authenticity of the data that is being processed by the system. There is another definition that we can add also to the CIA concept, and also refer to one of the security objectives or one of the results of having this security assurance is the concept of non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is something referred to no one will be able to deny what he did or she did on a system. If I send you an email Using the non-repudiation concept, system should be able to establish like a trail that me is the one who sent you this email. So I cannot later on deny that I sent you this email. How this can be achieved? It can be achieved by the integrity part, by having something like the digital signature. And digital signature, in a nutshell, is something like, let's say, a trail or a fingerprint that I'm leaving in the message that will point this message back to me. Or using the digital signature information, I can totally assure that, or I can totally confirm that this one is the one who sent this message. Because this message contains piece of information, and this information cannot be provided by anyone but this one. This is the concept of digital signature. And digital signature supports the non-repudiation concept. Non-repudiation refer to what? Refer to that when something happened, the subject who did this action cannot later on deny that he did or he committed this action. How it can be assured? By having trails or by having audit trails. So using these audit trails or using the digital signature, as we mentioned, this subject cannot later on deny what he or she did on the system. So on the opposite of CIA Triad, we have another model or another objective of hacker. So CIA Triad usually refer to the objective of security operation or security team. Security team need to make sure confidentiality, integrity, and availability goals are met. While hackers or threat actors or malicious people or malicious hackers are having a different goal. And this goal is the disclosure of confidential information, alteration of data managed by the organization, and denial of service. So, in a nutshell, that represents the hacker motivation, the hacker motive and goals, while CIA Triad represents the information security motive, how we can secure our information and keep it safe. There is a difference between the security objective and the privacy objective. Security objective usually refer to the efforts that the organization is doing in order to protect the data. In the goal of security, we aim to securing the data of the organization. So data that we are trying to secure in the case of CIA objective or information security objective is usually data owned by the organization. But in privacy, we are trying to secure another kind of data that are belong to our customers. So privacy in general refer to the protection of information, of personal information from unauthorized collection, use, disclosure, or retention. And we have a lot of arising and emerging privacy requirements that require organization to take care and to prove its accountability in terms of protecting the privacy information of its customers. For example, we have the privacy regulation related to European Union, which is the GDPR, and it is a regulation that is applied for any process or any entity that is processing EU citizen or Europe citizen information. As well as in US, in California state, for example, we have California Consumer Privacy Act, which is about protecting the privacy of consumer information. In most of or in all of the privacy laws, we are definitely see that there are a lot of common points between all of these privacy laws. For example, the lawful basis of processing. In privacy laws, organizations, or according to many of the privacy regulations, organizations must have a lawful basis for processing personal data. And this lawful base include consent of the user, contract, legal obligation, and vital interest, and public task, and legitimate interest. So lawful basis of manner is one of the key aspects of privacy regulation. Transparency. Organization must provide individual with clear and conscious information about how they are going to deal with the data. Data subject rights. If I'm providing a data for a company, I should have the authority, or I should have a way for controlling my data. Like if I need, for example, to download a copy from this data, the data collector should avail a process for allowing me for downloading such data. Such what we found in platforms such as Facebook or LinkedIn. I have the possibility to download my data. I also have the right to be forgotten, like having the right to raise a request for the data collector and ask them simply to delete my data. There should be also a data protection measures exist, like data protection control and so on. So basically all privacy regulations, including GDPR, including HIPAA, which is related to health insurance and health facilities privacy for patients, all of these regulations are simply around the same key principles or key concepts, like making sure that data is processed according to what it has been collected for. Collect the needed data only and do not collect much data that will not serve the purpose. So this is referring to the limitness of the data. The data subject rights, which include, for example, the request for deleting the data or the right to be forgotten. So we have many privacy laws, and these privacy laws might be applicable in some regional areas and might be applicable also in some types of businesses, such as the HIPAA Act or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. It is about the protection of personal health information. While GDPR, for example, is related to protecting the personal identifiable information. And personal identifiable information is any information that can establish the traces or reveal the real identity of someone. This is what do we mean by BII. So we have some information or some laws related to privacy, and as we mentioned, we have some common requirements between all of these regulations. And basically, these common requirements, as we mentioned, is the lawful basis of processing, transparency, and data subject rights, and data protection by design and by default. We organization must implement controls that could be technical or non-technical in order to make sure that data is protected by design, by implementing encryption, by implementing multi-factor authentication, by making sure, for example, if my application is requiring biometric data or biometric authentication mechanism, such as allowing the application to authorize the payment using my fingerprint, I need to make sure that this fingerprint is stored on my device, not being transferred to the data collector or to the company that runs this application, for example. This could be one of the requirements. One of the impacts of data privacy regulation when it started to be emerged, when you open any website for the first time, you might get a message related to cookie. So you got like a consent or a notification message from the website telling you that in order to provide you with good service, you need to accept the storing of our cookie in order to identify you and provide you with sort of personalized experience. Without privacy requirements, such a message will not exist, because this was one of the requirements for privacy regulation, to give the notification to end user about what kind of data that you are collecting about him and all of that stuff. So this is like an overview about what is privacy requirements and what do we mean by privacy in exchange to the security. And just for your information, we have some terms related to data. We first identified what do we mean by PII, or personal identifiable information. We also have another kind of data known as PHI, or personal health information. And also we have another kind of data known as CHD, which refer to cardholder data or cardholder information, which is related to financial sector and the payment information and so on. I hope that's clear for you. Another important aspect in privacy regulation is the notification. Most of the or all of the privacy regulations are restricting on the notification requirements. What do we mean by notification requirements? Notification requirements is a requirements on the data collector that they are obligated to report if they have a security breach or a situation where some of BII data has been compromised as part of a security attack or cyber breach. So as a security people, we need to recognize what is the notification requirements of each privacy regulation. For example, in case of GDPR, data owner or data collector need to report within 72 hours from being aware about data breach to a higher authority such as legal body or something like this. So you need to be aware also about the notification requirements regarding to how or what is the time frame for reporting for a security incident or data breach. And these 72 hours in case of GDPR are start to be counted since you became aware about this security breach or this security violation. So basically, risk management help us in determining what is the reasonable level of security. This is one of the key goals, by the way, of risk management. So when we apply security control, each control might affect the system usability. That's why we need to seek the balance between the security and the usability. And this can be achieved by identifying what is the main goal of this control by linking this control to a certain risk. And when we select the control, we select the control that can help us in reducing the level of risk identified to acceptable level. So controls need to be justified through the risk management process. So let's start from beginning. What do we mean by risk? Risk as a definition could have multiple definitions from different certification bodies, but let's care about what is the scope of our course. Risk has one definition, which is the effect of uncertainty on the objective. Here, we are talking about the effect of the uncertainty, something that could happen on our objective. But we didn't mention if this effect is negative or positive. Basically, the impact of risk could be positive or could be negative. Some organizations might be well prepared. So when a risk occurred or when something bad happened, they can benefit from this bad thing and increase their share in the market because they were prepared for such a situation before, because they were able to identify or predict such risk and they had a plan for how to benefit from this risk if it occurred. So risk can be something good or can be something really bad. The objective of risk management is to make sure that we are predicting the possible risk and we have controls that can help us in navigating and dealing with this risk in a way that can help us in making revenue if this situation occurred. So risk should be evaluated and we should have a process for the evaluation or evaluating what is the impact of this risk. And this impact assessment or this evaluation can be objective or subjective, depend on the type of asset that we are trying to assess the risk related to it. And when we talk about subjective and objective, we are basically differentiating between the quantitative way and the qualitative way. Quantitative way means that we can evaluate the level of risk based on the monetary damage, how much money we will incur in case this risk occurred. It is 100, 200 million, 2 million, billion. This is the quantitative or the definition or the objective way. This is basically what do we mean by objective or quantitative. The other way is to measure or evaluate or define a subjective term to identify what is the level of this risk. Is the level on our objective is low or medium or high? This is what do we mean by subjective. So risk is tied to an asset. And in the risk management, we try to first identify the assets, and then we try to identify the risk that could be linked to these assets. And we also evaluate the impact and the probability, and we decide what could be the proper response to this kind of risk. Should we implement a security control, or should we basically ignore or let's say accept this risk because basically the amount of damage is not something that we need to worry about because it is like a very minor damage, and this very minor damage can be basically absorbed by our operation, and we need to take this risk, or we will have this risk as part of our operations. We cannot live without it. We should live with this risk as long as we need to continue in doing our job or continue in doing our activity. So based on the evaluation and based on the informed decision that risk managers are trying to seek, we can decide what could be the appropriate risk response or appropriate way for managing the risk. So basically, risk response and managing the risk are the same concept, or refer to the process of how we are going to deal with a specific risk. So after managing the risk or responding to a risk, we will document the decision and we will monitor the level of risk just to make sure that the previous decision of accepting or mitigating the risk is still relevant, that the decision is still linked to our existing situation. So another definition for risk is that risk is the product of likelihood and impact. The result here will be the level of risk. But this way, this equation is suitable in the context of subjective risk analysis, not objective. So what is the risk management process? Risk management is the overall life cycle of identifying assets, identifying risk, assessing this risk, evaluating the level of this risk, and controlling or applying control or responding to the risk, and review and monitor the risk status. So risk management is the overall framework of dealing with the risk from the beginning till the end. While risk management, managing the risk is just very small aspect in the overall risk management process, which is concerned about what we shall do with a specific type of risk. So in risk management process, we start by risk identification. And in order to properly identify risk, we should properly identify the scope, context, and the criteria, as well as identifying what are the assets that is under our scope. After identifying the risk, we move to the risk analysis stage. And in risk analysis, we perform like a likelihood calculation, consequences calculation, and we compute the total level of risk. Like, for example, if we found, for example, that the consequences of a particular risk is losing like 1000 USD, and the probability or likelihood of having this risk across the year is 10 times, in that case, the computation or the level of risk will be the product of 1010. It will result in $10,000, for example. So here we identified what is the level of risk in a very simple way. Of course, we go deeper, or we will discuss what is the different equations that can be used in managing the risk or evaluating the level of risk or analyzing the level of risk to be specific. But after identifying the level of risk, we go to risk evaluation. And the goal of risk evaluation part here is to evaluate if this level of risk is acceptable by management or not. In organizations, the risk management framework, when we establish the risk management framework, we also establish the levels of risk. We can say that we have some kind of risk that are too low or too minor, which is not a problem at all. Another types of risk could be high somehow, but it is within the acceptable level. It is within the appetite or target level of risk. And from organization or risk management point of view, any risk below the appetite level is accepted risk because it is a strategic. It is part of the risk that we are encountering as part of our day-to-day activities. But any risk beyond or more than the appetite level, which means it is in this area, this risk need to be evaluated and need to be treated. Some kind of risk that may fall above here or above this level might also be accepted or might also be simply treated as acceptable risk or risk that we do not need to take a decision or we do not need to change or control it. Simply risk acceptance refer to not doing anything. I discovered that I have a risk. I decided to take no action. What is the basis of such a decision? Because maybe the risk is very low, or I believe that or even though this risk is identified, but the probability of having this risk real is very minor. So in that case, I might go and accept the risk because the impact is below appetite. But in some situations, we might have a risk that is exceeding the appetite level, but for some psychological reasons, the risk manager or the one who is taking the decision of dealing with risk might decide to accept this risk because this risk is still within the risk tolerance level. And risk tolerance level refer to the level of risk that we are able to manage it financially. We are in a good financial standing to absorb this risk even it occurred. We will decide to take no control because maybe we are not believing in the objectivity or in the true results of the risk management activity or the risk analysis activity. Maybe management aware that the risk manager who did the assessment is not so much optimistic. So he is always bringing the dark scenarios. So they might say, okay, leave it. We are agreeing because this level of risk, even if it occurred, which we do not believe it will occur, still can be managed or can still be controlled because we have enough money to cover this damage. But here also management need to consider the risk aggregation because the collection or combination of some minor risk, when it come together, it will lead to domino effect. It will lead to more advanced level of risk and so on. So basically, the objective of risk evaluation is to compare what is the level of risk against what is the appetite and the risk tolerance, and try to recommend what could be the action here. If the risk is within the appetite or below the appetite level, we can decide to accept. If the risk is above the appetite, we can decide to apply security control or do risk avoidance or do a risk transfer, and we will discuss what do we mean by all of this. But as a general note here, risk evaluation is conducted by risk manager. Risk manager is doing the risk evaluation and recommending the controls, but they are not having the ultimate or the final authority for approving which control to be used. At the end, the decision or recommendation will go to the risk treatment stage, which will be like an activity conducted by senior management or security steering committee or some lead expert who is in charge of taking such a decision. And based on the criteria, they might decide what is the feasible or what is the applicable risk treatment option, either by accepting maybe the risk is below the appetite and the risk analyst is saying that it can be accepted. But from management point of view, this risk is tied to one of the critical assets or could be linked to an asset that will have a more strategic importance in the next couple of weeks or months. So in that case, management can decide to implement a control even if this level of risk is within the appetite level. So the decision of applying or the decision of which type of risk response strategy that we are going to deal with is not the responsibility of risk management team. It usually should be assigned to some of the senior management level. So they have the ultimate decision here. And we should also, during our risk management activities, we should ensure that we have good recording and documentation and reporting for the information. We should have a communication and consultation with different stakeholders that we might try or that we might need to deal with them. And also we should perform monitoring and review for the existing identified risk just to make sure if any decision taken before is still relevant, still applicable to our business nature, or no more required or no more needed.
Now we will go through introduction and a quick overview about the steps included in the risk management process. And we will start by discussing the process of risk assessment. So, risk assessment process includes three major steps. Step number one is to do the risk analysis, to do the risk identification. We are actually identifying the risk. Step number two is to perform the risk analysis. Step number three is to do the risk evaluation. After finishing the risk assessment part, we will move to the risk treatment or risk managing stage, which will be basically about deciding which type of control that will help in decreasing the level of the risk. So, risk analysis, which is the second stage in the risk assessment process, will work after identifying the risk, and using the risk analysis we can evaluate how critical this risk is. We can do risk analysis using two techniques. The first one is a subjective technique, which is also known as qualitative technique, and second technique is known as objective or quantitative technique. The difference between both of these techniques is in qualitative or in subjective approach, we use subjective terms to refer to the level of risk, like when we say the total damage will be so high. In this case, we are not using numbers, we are using subjective terms that indicate the severity of the risk. In the quantitative approach, we use numbers, we use equations, and based on these equations, we can identify the level of risk in monetary value or in numbers. Like we can lose $1 million if this risk became real. So quantitative is more objective, but as you can see, quantitative might need some data in order to increase or in order to do the quantitative risk analysis in a good approach. So by the way, qualitative or subjective approach will be more beneficial in the IT environment when the value of data cannot be determined or the value of system cannot be determined. So we can usually say that the subjective approach or qualitative approach is used in IT environment. However, if we need to do quantitative approach for IT environment, it is doable as well, but this will take a lot of time and will require a lot of data. The result of quantitative risk analysis approach or risk analysis process in general will be influenced by the quality of data and how many historical data that we are keeping in our inventory or keeping in our records. So objective approach require historical information and it is very time consuming, but in subjective approach it is more easier and can derive the results more quickly. Subjective risk analysis results depend on the assessor quality as well as data quality. And we can also say that there is a technique or other technique for risk analysis known as the semi-quantitative. And in the semi-quantitative approach, we use mixture of objective and subjective. How we can do the semi-quantitative risk analysis? Basically, we define numbers for the severity level. So if I said this level of risk is very high and very high is equal to 90. In that case, instead of saying this risk is very high, I will say the risk level is 90. So what is the benefit here? What are the benefits I got by changing the naming convention such as high, critical or low to a number or a numeric value? Basically, this can be helpful if I am trying to represent the level of risk in a flowchart or let's say on a pie chart or in a heat map or in a risk heat map, which is basically some statistical graphic or some graphs that require numbers in order to be understandable. So in the objective risk analysis, we are using some equations. So you need to pay attention that in objective risk analysis, and allow me right now to write here now on the screen. In objective risk analysis, we need to understand what is the single loss expectancy first. What is the single loss expectancy? Single loss expectancy or SLE refer to how much I will suffer or how much money I will lose in case risk happened for one time. So if I'm assuming that every time the risk could happen, I will lose like 1,000 US dollar. In this case, the SLE is 1,000 US dollar. The second definition that I need to understand is the annual rate of occurrence. So annual rate of occurrence refer to how many times I expect this risk can be repeated across the year. And annual rate of occurrence equal the number of incidents that I have in my records divided by the number of years which I keep this record for. Like for example, according to my records, I'm aware that fire incident or a car crash incident happen like 500 times every 5 years or something like this. So that's mean the annual rate of occurrence will be 100 per year. So in order to get the total value of risk, which is known as annual loss expectancy, I will multiply or I will get the product of SLE and the ARO. So it will be 1000 product the 100 and I will get the value of 100,000. This is the annual loss expectancy, which refer to how much I could lose across the year if this risk happened this amount of times. And as you can see here, the SLE value is a financial value or value that indicate money. And this value should be driven from statistical analysis and past information records, as well as the annual rate of occurrence, which require us also to be aware about what was the loss when this incident happened before. And based on these two values, I can get the annual loss expectancy or the ALE, which will be the product of SLE and ARO. One last information that I need to give you here is the SLE is usually or it can be calculated based on factor known as exposure factor. And exposure factor or EF can be represented in percentage format. So I can say that, for example, every time incident happen, I will lose like 10% from the asset value. In this case, if I know the asset value, which could be 100, and I said, for example, that exposure factor is 10%, in that case, I will lose $10. This is how I can get the SLE. In the exam questions, you may find the SLE is already known and ARO is already known, and what is needed is to derive the value of annual loss expectancy. Why do you need to do so? Because you need to understand that whenever you select a control or whenever you decide to do an investment in order to mitigate a specific risk, you need to make sure that the control value does not exceed the losses caused by the risk. Like when I tell you, for example, in order to mitigate a risk that can give me per year 100,000 US dollar as a losses, I will implement a security control cost me like 400,000 USD. So I will ask you, based on the SLE and ARO information, do you recommend me to apply the security control which cost me 400,000? The answer will be yours, of course. And what I can say about this answer is the control cost should not overweight the total losses. So in that case, 400,000 is 4 times the amount of risk per year, and I need to pay 400,000 per year. So in this case, I will lose more money because I'm applying a control, and this control exceeds the total value of asset or exceed even the total value of risk that I could encounter. That's how you are expected to see the concept of quantitative approach, SLE, ARO, and ALE in the context of the exam questions or something like this. So here I'm just summarizing what is the single loss expectancy, what is the annual rate of occurrence, and all the equations that I just said, how to get the SLE. It is asset value multiplied by the exposure factor, which is usually a percentage format. ARO is how many times incident occurred divided by the amount of years. You can get the ARO directly, or you can be required to give the ARO by yourself by giving you like the times that incident occurred and the amount of years according to the historical data, and you can get the ARO by yourself. The last value we will get is the annual loss expectancy, which will indicate or refer to the amount of losses across the year, which is the result of multiplying or the product of SLE and ARO. So we need to have data in order to perform the objective approach, and this is the most challenging part in the concept of objective risk analysis. Regarding subjective and semi-quantitative approach, it is very, let's say, very easy when it got compared to the quantitative approach. As we mentioned in subjective approach, I'm using a technique of defining the likelihood and defining the consequences in, let's say, subjective format. In subjective approach, the risk is equal the likelihood multiplied multiplied by the impact. So the risk is the product of likelihood and impact. Likelihood is the probability of having the risk, and the impact or consequences is the impact of this risk. So, for example, I can say that the risk could be in terms of likelihood, could be rare, but in terms of impact could be catastrophic. In that case, impact of the likelihood of rare is equal 1. This is the semi-quantitative approach, and the impact level of catastrophic is equal 5. So in that case, the value of risk will be 1 by 5, and it will be 5. This is how I am doing the semi-quantitative approach, which is a mix between the quantitative and the qualitative approach. And it is more used in IT because using this way, I can use this numerical value to represent it in like a graph or something like this. So here just I'm giving you also another example for what is the best practices for how to deal the risk. Like for example, if I'm dealing with the risk in this square, this risk should be periodically monitored without applying control, because basically this level of risk will be acceptable. But if I have a level of risk that is very high, but there is very rare interval to be performed, we need to have a continuous monitoring to make sure that this level of risk will not appear suddenly. So we have here what we are talking about, and we have discussed what do we mean by risk analysis process, and also we discussed what do we mean by objective and what do we mean by subjective approach. I hope that's clear. And in subjective approach only, we are just identifying the risk by low, medium, high. And we will get a challenge in the subjective approach when we say, for example, give me the value of risk according to the subjective approach. You will not be able to multiply low likelihood without numbers in critical impact without numbers. I cannot tell you that give me the value of the product of rare multiplied by major. You will not get a value in this case. That's why semi-quantitative approach appear here in on the scene, so we can use this numerical value to derive the value of risk. So once we get the value of risk, and as we know what is the acceptable level of risk from the management point of view, we will move on to the risk evaluation stage. And in the risk evaluation stage, the main purpose of risk evaluation stage is to compare the level of identified risk, the level or the result of risk analysis, against the risk appetite level defined by the management of the organization. And if the risk is within the acceptable threshold, we can recommend as risk assessors or risk specialists to accept this level of risk. But if the risk is above the appetite level, we can advise in using or in implementing a particular security control, or use one of the risk managing techniques, which we will discuss later on. So risk assessment results and the evaluation results and recommendation for controls should be submitted to management to take decision. So the one who is taking decision regarding which control to be applied is not the risk assessor or the risk manager. He just does the analysis and do the evaluation against the baseline defined by management, which is the level of risk or risk appetite. And then based on this evaluation, we can recommend what is the proper risk response method, which we will submit it as a recommendation to the management. Pay attention that there is no thing called zero risk, but we are aware right now that there is a level known as acceptable level of risk, which is within the appetite level of the management defined by the senior management of the organization. And we have level of risk that is known as tolerance. And the level of risk tolerance is level that is slightly higher than the acceptable risk. But here in this gray area, management can decide to either apply a control or they can simply accept the risk as well. So it is not necessarily to have risk in this area to be accepted only, but even in this gray area between the appetite level and risk tolerance level, we can say that due to some psychological reasons, management could decide to accept this risk, although the risk level as a result from analysis stage does not comply with the risk appetite level defined by management as we discussed earlier. I hope that was clear for you and see you in the next video. So we are continuing in the topic of risk management, and we will discuss right now different terminologies that are related to the overall concept of risk management, which you are expected to hear a lot in real life environment. So you need to understand that any new function, any new service, any feature that you are actually add or introduce to a production environment not come alone with the benefits or the intended benefits. It can also come with a new type of risks. It can introduce risks like when you open internet connection or when you allow internet service for guest users, for example, or when you create a specific network for guest users and keep this network unauthenticated. In addition that you are giving a new service for the guest users, but you are also introducing a new risk to the organization. And this kind of risk is known as the inherent risk. It is inherent because it comes by default whenever you introduce a new service. You actually apply the controls in order to manipulate this inherent risk. When you install a new security system in order to reduce the danger, in this case you are applying a control, and the goal of the control is to reduce the inherent risk to acceptable level. So is there a risk called acceptable level of risk? Is there a kind of level for risk that is considered as acceptable? Yes, of course. Organizations, especially the senior management in the organization, are responsible for defining the risk appetite. And the risk appetite refers to the acceptable level of risk. So when we apply controls, we try using this control to minimize the risk to acceptable level that is within the appetite level defined by the top management or the steering committee. Remember, there is no such 100% of security. There is nothing like this. What you are trying to do is to minimize the level of risk to acceptable level. I hope this point is clear. So, inherent risk is also known as gross risk because it is total risk. It is uncontrolled risk. There are different terminologies that are related to inherent risk. So pay attention that whenever you see total risk or gross risk, both of these terms are referring or actually the writer is mentioning or want to mention the inherent risk in this case. So gross risk or total risk, both of them are the same. Okay, in addition to, of course, inherent risk. So all of these terms are similar to each other. So after applying the control, we said that there will be a remaining level of risk, and this remaining level of risk should be within the risk appetite level or acceptable range defined by management. This type of risk that remain after applying the control is known as the residual risk. So residual risk refers to the risks that remain after applying the security controls. And we need to make sure that our risk is identified and monitored and after being controlled, which means when we identify the risk and when we define the controls that can decrease the level of risk, we need to make sure that this risk will be continuously monitored. Because at any point of time, if the residual risk increased above the acceptable level of risk, in that case, we will need to revise our control or change our control or do something like this. So who is the owner of the risk? The risk owner is the individual who is ultimately accountable for ensuring the risk is managed appropriately. What could be an example for this? If we have someone who is benefit from a specific system and we found that this system is subject to a huge or very critical security vulnerability. In this situation, we will advise to apply control. Who will be responsible or who will be accountable to make sure that this control is applied? Of course, the one who will benefit most from the system, of course, will be the one who has the final decision about what to be performed on a specific system. For example, if the system cannot be restarted without approval of someone, in that case, this one will be the control or will be the system owner. And as he is the system or she is the system owner, in this case, he will be also the risk owner. I hope this point is clear to you. Risk managing or risk response refer to the next process in the risk management topic, which is related to select or decide how to deal with a specific risk. After evaluating the risk level based on the analysis stage compared to the risk appetite or the level of acceptable risk defined by the senior management of the organization, the risk management move to the next part, which is deciding what could be the control. We have different approaches for how to manage the risk or how to respond to the risk. The first one is to mitigate the risk. And what do we mean by risk mitigation is basically apply the security control. When do we decide to do risk mitigation response? When we do not have tolerance to accept this risk. If this risk is above the acceptable level with a very high threshold, and even the psychological reasons or psychological justification is not allowing us to accept this kind of risk, in this case we will decide to do risk mitigation. How we can perform risk mitigation? By applying security controls. If I am aware that antivirus solution is required in order to counter the risk of viruses and malware, in this case I am applying a risk mitigation technique or applying a mitigation as a risk managing or a risk response technique. So risk mitigation refer to one of the techniques used in the risk managing part, and in this technique we are simply applying a security control. We need to be aware that the cost of control should not exceed the asset value and should not exceed the level of risk that could happen if we are comparing the cost of control compared to the level of losses on yearly interval. The second approach for responding to the risk is known as risk acceptance. Risk acceptance can also be known as risk bearing or risk keeping. And in the risk acceptance, we are basically find that the level of risk as per the analysis stage is within the acceptable level or within the level of risk appetite. And in this situation, we may not decide to use a security control because basically we will see that there will be no need for do additional investment and the level of risk is very minor. So in this case we will just document this risk and we will decide that we are accepting this risk. Sometimes organizations need to accept specific types of risk in order to continue making revenue. Like when we operate a specific sector or in a specific country in order to generate revenue and make money, we are basically accepting the risk because this is a strategic risk we need to take in order to continue making revenue and making money. The third approach in managing the risk is known as risk transfer. Risk transfer can also known as sharing the risk, and in the risk transfer we are basically cascading the risk to another party. Like when I have a risk in very critical process and this process require very critical expertise or require high level of knowledge, and I'm aware that if I am doing this job by myself I could be subject to issues, problem, something like this. In this case I may decide to outsource this process. Or even risk transfer can be represented in the insurance. So if I am, for example, suspectable that my business could be interrupted due to cyber attacks, I may do all provisions needed from my side in order to make sure that my system will not be subject to cyber attack. And after then I can ask an insurance company to provide insurance against such threats or against such risk. But pay attention that risk transfer does not remove the accountability or liability. So if you are outsourcing a specific process and for some reason this outsourcer failed in complying with the security requirements which caused a security incident, the one will be accountable in front of original data owners or in front of media and in front of the world will be the original owner of the process which did the outsourcing. So it is very important to realize that risk transfer, maybe it can transfer the risk, but it does not transfer the accountability or liability inside the justice and so on. The fourth option and last official option of risk managing is known as risk avoidance. And in the risk avoidance, we are basically evaluate the process, and based on the evaluation, we can decide that this process does not provide real business value to the organization. So as this process is introducing a high level of risk and at the same time it does not consider as a critical or business related process, we in this situation we may decide to terminate the process completely, which will lead to avoiding the risk and removing the root cause or the source of the risk. We need also to pay attention that there might be a fifth option for risk response, but this is not an official option and it is not an option at all, by the way. And this option is known as risk ignorance or risk rejection. And the difference between risk ignorance and risk acceptance is in risk acceptance, we formally understand the risk, we formally discuss the risk, and we formally, based on the informed decision, we decide to accept this level of risk and leave it as it is. But in the risk rejection or in the risk ignorance, we are basically does not consider the risk is effective or consider the risk in place, or we do not consider even the presence of such risk. So this risk will not be documented, and as the risk is not documented, it will not be monitored. One of the reasons of deciding the response technique and after then apply a control. One of the reasons, by the way, is to do formal acceptance for accepting the risk is that we are going to document this kind of risk. And after then, we will review and monitor this risk based on some measurement criteria to make sure that the risk that has been accepted before is still within the acceptable level. It was not increased, or let's say the risk level is still relevant to the decisions that we have taken before regarding this risk. I hope this point was clear for you, and thank you for viewing, and see you in next video. The process of risk reporting is the next step after managing the risk or responding to the risk level. In risk reporting, we are basically report the level of risk and report the decisions that we have taken toward a specific risk. And in the risk reporting, we need to make sure that risk reports should be tailored to the intended audience. So we can use some techniques such as heat maps or charts or graphs in order to represent how the risk has been identified and what is the category of this risk. Is it high, critical, or low? And what was the progress in the process of managing the risk, and what was the status of this risk before and after applying the security control. Risk, once it is identified and once we decide the level and the response strategy, should be documented in the applicable or according to the applicable process in the organization. Usually, we can see that in the organization, they have, or most of the organization have a document known as risk register. And in the risk register, we are basically documented everything that could be related to risk that has been identified, along with the control that has been selected, and along with also the KRI or the key risk indicators or the monitoring criteria and the monitoring duration of this specific risk. Acceptable risk, for example, should be documented in the risk register. Also, we should have also another form known as risk acceptance form, which is abbreviated as RAF. So we have many kind of documentation that we are using in reporting the risk. The most common one is the risk register, which include all of the information that might be needed related to the risk that has been identified with the controls and with the monitoring criteria and the interval of monitoring this risk. And for accepted risk or the risks that go through the official or undergo the formal acceptance process, it should be documented as well in another separate form known as risk acceptance form. What could be the difference between risk register and risk acceptance form? That in risk acceptance form, we can have more information and more analysis that has been approved by the senior management in order to have this kind of risk accepted or approved to be treated without node controls or not to be treated at all. So in risk register also, we need to make sure that any identified risk should have identified owner. So if we do not have a risk owner or if we do not have someone who owns the issue, we will not be certain that this risk will be treated or this risk will be closed. So risk register is something like this, and in the risk register we will have description of the risk, who is the owner of this risk, what is the reason of this risk, and what is the impact or effect, and also we will identify in semi-quantitative form or in quantitative form what is the probability and what is the impact. In case of the quantitative, we will identify, as we agreed, the SLE and the ARO to get the over or ALE value. But in IT, we usually rely on the semi-quantitative approach more. And based on these two values, we can get the level of risk, the total level, which will be the product of likelihood and impact. Then we will identify what is the risk response strategy and what is the cost of this strategy. And as I mentioned to you before, we may also find the risk monitoring criteria and what are the indicators or metrics that we are going to monitor in order to identify the risk or in order to evaluate the level of risk on periodic intervals. As I mentioned before, when you accept a specific risk, the acceptance decision is related to the time where or when this decision has been taken. But consider that this risk was accepted because it was related to non-important service from organization point of view. But by time, this service became more important to the organization. So in such a situation, the level of risk that was accepted before was accepted because the level of risk or this risk was related to an important asset, but right now the risk became related to one of the important assets for the organization. So the accepted risk will not be accepted anymore. We will need to apply control in order to manage or reduce this level of risk to acceptable level. So consider this point is very important. So for risk monitoring, and in order to do effective monitoring, we need to make sure that we have a metrics. And in metrics, we can rely on the key performance indicators. And based on the key performance indicator, we can evaluate what is the effectiveness of control or what is the level of risk that we are trying to evaluate. Usually, key performance indicators are used in the control review. So if I am deciding to implement a firewall as part of my risk response strategy, and in order to make sure that this firewall is effective, I will identify some key performance indicators such as how many attacks this firewall is detecting compared to how many attacks that is not detected, how many false positive alerts, how many whatever. So key performance indicators can be used when I do evaluation for the control or monitoring for a security control. But in the case of risk, I can use the key risk indicators. And the key risk indicators, by the way, is a KPI, but not every KPI is a key risk indicator. Key performance indicator could be the staff retention, having employee in my organization, and these organizations are not, these employee are not leaving my organization. This could be an indicator for effective HR management or effective compensation management as part of the HR process. In this case, isn't that a key performance indicator? Of course it is. But I can use the same key performance indicator to reveal the issues. or to give me early warning about a problem happening in my organization. Like if I mentioned that the staff turnover increased, this could be an indicator for a risk that someone is trying to drive the employees out of my organization. Or maybe I have some bad management style. So just for simplifying the concept for you, key performance indicators are usually used to evaluate the control effectiveness. Key risk indicators are used to identify or get proactive alerts for the risk before it emerges and before it become very severe. And key risk indicators in general, they are KPI. They are key performance indicators. But not every key performance indicator can be suitable to act as a key risk indicator. So we need to choose the key risk indicators wisely. KRI are linked to KPI. Every KRI is KPI. Every KRI is KPI in nature, but not every KPI can be suitable to be treated as a KRI. So when we select a KPI, we need to make sure that KPI or key performance indicator has some qualities known as SMART. KPI which I will choose during the control design or during the control implementation in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the control. I need to make sure that this KPI is specific, which means it is related to this control. It should be measurable, so it could give me like a quantitative value, and based on this quantitative value I can identify the norm, the baseline, and the out of norm status. Should be attainable, which means that KPI should be something that is achievable and something that is really happen in the real life. Relevant, which means it is relevant to the process that I'm trying to evaluate or control that I'm trying to evaluate. And time bound, which refer to that if I got a specific value, this value should be able or can be easily mapped to a specific time stamp or a specific time range or time window. These are the criteria of the KPI selection or key performance indicator selection. KRI, on the other hand, in addition to the qualities that will come or will be in it by nature because it is a KPI, should be measurable. And the most important thing about the KRI, I will not say the rest of it. The most important thing regarding the KRI is that KRI should be sensitive. Why sensitivity is very important aspect in KRI selection? Because based on this sensitivity, we could identify or we could predict the risk earlier. If the KRI is not sensitive, in that case, KRI will not be able to detect the change in the risk level, and as a result, it will not provide a real value for the risk that it is trying to monitor. The last information that we need to know about the KRI types. KRI can be leading KRIs, and what do we mean by leading KRI is that the leading KRI can predict the issue, while other type of KRI is known as lagging KRI, and the lagging KRI reveal issue that happened already and it just reveal the result of this issue. It just reveal what are the consequences of something already happened, while the leading KRI predict or provide like an early warning or early indicators to identify or to represent or give a warning about a specific problem or a specific issue. I hope this topic was clear for you, and thank you for viewing this video. Security controls are the safeguards and the techniques and tools that we use in order to minimize risk related to a specific asset or process. Security controls can be technical and could be also non-technical. And we need to make sure while we are selecting security controls or any control in general that the cost of the control does not exceed the amount of the asset value or the total value of risk that it is trying to protect against. So we need to make sure that whenever we do an investment in a specific security control, this investment should be relative to the asset value or the information value that we are trying to protect. When we do security investment in order to acquire a control, this is not a return on investment. We do not expect to have a direct revenue attributed to the selection or acquisition of this control. But in exchange of acquiring the control, we can get the return on the security investment, which can be more stability in the system, more uptime, more customer satisfaction, and as a result, this will attribute in a way that is indirect in the total revenue and the total income of the organization. Controls can be categorized in many ways. Controls can be categorized based on its type. We have administrative control, and we have physical controls, and we have technical controls. This is based on the type. Also, controls can be be identified and categorized based on the function. Like we have preventive controls, we have detective controls, we have corrective and deterrent controls. Controls also can be identified and categorized depend on when it is going to be used. We can have, or we can see that there are types of control that can be used before the incident. There are another type of controls that can be used during the incident, and there could be another types of controls that can be used after the incident. So in the next slides, we are going to introduce and understand what is this classification, or what are the different types and techniques for classifying the controls. So based on the function, we can say that the first type of control based on the function is the preventive control. And the preventive control, as the name implies, it helps in preventing the issue or preventing the error. How it can do that? It has the capability to detect and monitor and predict the potential problem and stop this problem. What could be an example for preventive controls? Could be the security gate, security doors, the lock, the fence, firewall, or antivirus solution. All of these solutions or all of these type of solutions are basically controls, and all of it are categorized as preventive controls. Why? Because it is able to prevent the problem. The second type of controls based on the function is known as the detective control. And detective control has the capability of detecting and reporting the occurrence of error. Security cameras can be an example for detective controls. SIM solution or lock collector or monitoring solution which monitor your IT devices 24/7 could also be an example for detective controls. Audit is a detective control because audit is a way to detect the problems. So audit is a detective control, but when we try to figure out what is the type of audit control, audit is administrative control. Remember, as I mentioned to you, there are several techniques that based on it we can use in order to identify the type of control based on the type, or based on the function, or based on when this control can be used. The third type of controls based on the function is known as the corrective controls. Corrective controls help in minimizing the impact of the threat and also help in correcting the error after the problem. Backup solution could be an example for corrective control. Incident response plan or disaster recovery plan, which help in recovering from a security incident or from system disruption, is also a corrective control. Last type of controls based on the function known as deterrent controls. And deterrent controls can be similar to the detective and the preventive controls. Deterrent controls is a type of control that when it presents, it can reduce the likelihood of having the attack or having the intrusion. Like if you have security dogs can prevent the attack, that's correct. But also when the thief or when the intruder sees that you have security dogs, he might think twice before conducting or performing the attack or enter your facility in an authorized way. So that's why it is called deterrent controls, and deterrent controls can be also detective because security cameras can detect the issue or can detect the intrusion, but also security cameras can act as a deterrent way in order to prevent or in order to reduce the likelihood of the attack on your organization. When we compare regarding before, during, and after, regarding when the control can be used, we can say that deterrent controls can be used before the incident, such as security cameras or the warning banners. If the incident occurred, detective controls can detect the incident and the preventive controls can deal with this incident. And after the incident, we may use the corrective controls in order to reduce the level of damage. In the case of fire damage, for example, during the incident, we can use the detective controls, which can be the smoke detectors or fire sensors or heat sensors. But after the detecting the incident, we can release the fire suppression system. It will not prevent because we already have the fire happening, but it will recover and will help in reducing the impact. So this is what do we mean by corrective controls. So sometimes corrective controls can, or let's say corrective controls can be preventive and can be corrective as well, depend on when it's going to be used. If the control used after starting the damage, in that case it will be corrective because it will reduce the damage or minimize the impact. But if the control used before even causing the damage, in that case it will be a preventive controls. So when we look to the security controls in action, we have this normal cycle of cyber attack. We usually have threat actor who use threat to initiate a cyber attack, and the cyber attack targeting vulnerability exists in a particular asset. This result or the result of this chain will be causing an impact. So by using deterrent security controls, we can reduce the likelihood. If we have warning banners, if we have like instructions, or if we have a monitoring system, strong monitoring system, and the adversary is aware about the existence of such a system, in this case, this can reduce the likelihood. But if the adversary is determined and want to launch the attack, we will have our detective controls detect the attack when it occurs. Detective controls has two functions. First one is to detect, and second one could be to trigger the response, trigger the preventive control action. One of the examples for this is the smoke detectors. Smoke detectors, which used as part of fire suppression system, detect the existence of smoke and instruct the preventive control in this case, which is the fire suppression system, in order to release the gas or release the suppression system in order to counter the fire. If the preventive control run before causing damage, in that case it will protect. But if the preventive controls caused run or triggered after starting the damage, it will reduce the impact, so it can be treated as a corrective control as well. Corrective control itself can be used in order to decrease the impact. So depending on the context, we can identify what is the context or what is the type of this control. So usually one of the differences between detective and the preventive control is that preventive control can detect and prevent, while detective control alone can detect the issue only, but it cannot do protection. What are the different type of controls based on the function and based on the type? Is it technical, administrative, or physical? For example, if we are talking about detective controls, we have many ways in order to implement detective controls. From technical standpoint, SIM solution is a detective control. SIM solution is a control or a security tool that collect logs or collect system logs from different systems across the organization. Intrusion detection system could be motion detector system or could be intrusion detection system implemented in the network or in the IT or OT network, and it can help in detecting the attack, but it does not take action. It just provide or trigger an alarm. Vulnerability scanners help in scanning the network in order to identify if a particular system has a specific security vulnerability. So it can detect the issue and can be used or can give a warning so the security team can work on patching this issue. This is regarding detective security controls that are technical. But for administrative security controls, we can say that detective security controls can be also the audit. So audit, for example, or when we look to the process of auditing, auditing is a detective control. So audit here could be a detective control which can be used in order to detect the problems, and it is administrative or managerial. It is not a technical control. Security assessment or review is also kind of detective controls which has administrative form. Mandatory leaves, which one of the techniques or one of the HR security controls which require employees in a specific job function, usually working in banking or financial sector, to take mandatory vacation, and based on this vacation they can evaluate if there are any frauds caused by the employee or not. If employee is conducting a fraud or conducting a security violation, he will usually not tend to take any vacations just to cover the tracks or hide the tracks. So that's why in banking sector there are some requirements for all employees to take mandatory leave for at least 2 weeks. And during these 2 weeks, there will be no access to the corporate systems. This will help in identifying the frauds, and this is a detective control from administrative nature. Quality control, which is an established process in the organization that identify what are the quality measures that need to be in place and evaluate the product or system against it, is one of the administrative detective controls. Regarding physical type, we have motion sensors, laser beam which can detect the motion, video cameras, smoke detectors, and the security alarm system. All of it can be categorized as physical security controls. For deterrent type or for the function of deterring the attack, also we have technical, administrative, and physical. For technical, we have the system login banner. When you log into a system and you find that, hey, this system is protected and owned by the company X, do not access this system unless you are authorized or you will be fall under the jurisdiction or we will bring you to the court. In this case, this can deter the threat actor or deter any unauthorized one who accessed to the system by mistake. This could be an example for the deterrent control from technical point of view. For administrative deterrent controls, security awareness training, policies and standard and procedures, exit interview, which is used by the HR to remind the former employee or employees that going to leave the organization about the signed non-disclosure agreement with the organization and the implications of not keeping the secrecy of this non-disclosure agreement could be an example for deterrent controls from the administrative point of view. For physical security, we can say that fences and security cameras which are used in detective and fences which are a preventive control by nature and warning banners, all of it are deterrent controls as well. Because if the intruder found or saw a security camera, this might reduce his likelihood in order to initiate an attack on the organization. For the function of prevention, and from technical point of view, we have many types of preventive controls that is used in IT, such as network firewall, which used in controlling the traffic between different destinations or different sources inside the network. We have the antivirus, which used in detecting and preventing the malicious files from being executed or being running on our systems. We have endpoint detection and response, which is advanced type of antivirus which can detect the zero-day malware and can detect the malware that are trying to evade the normal antivirus solution. It can detect viruses and detect malicious codes based on the behavior. We have the XDR solutions, which can automate and can manage multiple or orchestrate the process of responding to malicious code across the network, not only on the endpoint level. We have the email gateway, which is a tool that usually put before the mail server of any organization in order to filter the emails coming or going outside the organization to make sure that, that these emails are not spam and does not malicious code or malicious software to infect the employees, because email is one of the destinations that threat actors are usually trying to use in order to deliver malware to the organization. We have the intrusion prevention system and web application firewalls, which are helpful in detecting cyber attacks such as DOS attacks and cross-site scripting in case of the WAF, and different types of exploitation that may target operating system vulnerabilities using intrusion prevention system. For administrative preventive controls, we can say that change management process, which is responsible for introducing the changes in proper way, could be a preventive. Quality assurance, which establishes the standard of quality, which will be used after then by the quality control team to review the measures. This is kind of preventive control because they are establishing process and standard, so it should prevent the problem from occurring from the beginning, unlike the quality control, which basically evaluates the final product against the quality standard put here in the quality assurance stage. Segregation of duty, which is making sure that specific critical functions should be segregated between two or more peoples to avoid the overpower. Job rotation, which is one of the HR controls or personal governance controls, which help in making sure a specific individual will not remain in the same post for forever, so there will be no ability to fraud and it can be used to specific type of business. Security awareness training could be preventive if it provide information that will be helpful in saving the user from falling a prey for a cyber attack. Safety training, which also instruct users about what is the safety measures that need to be followed in the workplace. Regarding physical preventive security controls, any physical security controls such as fences, locks, fire suppression systems, all of them are preventive controls. But pay attention that fire control system or fire suppression system, if it was used before the incident, it will be preventive. But if it used after the fire broke out, in this case, it will be a corrective. I hope you understand what I mean here. We have another control known as man trap for entry doors. And man trap, you can Google it, guys. Man trap is simply a way to make sure no one will follow authorized employee from the door of the organization. So we will have like two doors. The first one is accessible by fingerprint, and then we have an empty space, and then we have another door. So if someone is following the original employee, he will be detected here. This prevent or this kind of attack is known as piggybacking, or tailgating. So man trap can be helpful in preventing such a type of attacks. For corrective controls, we have different types of corrective controls from technical nature, such as backup and recovery or network isolation. Like I have a problem or I have virus that is going to be spread or spreading in my network and is spreading, for example, in building number P. So I can isolate the rest of the buildings in order to reduce the impact. For administrative type of corrective controls, we can say that incident response plan and disaster recovery plan, which help in minimizing business disruption, is types of administrative corrective controls. For physical corrective controls, fire suppression system and physical segmentation could be an example for corrective control. Physical segmentation can be, for example, if I have multiple rooms or multiple corridors. And if fire broke out here in this area will be totally segmented from the entire building. So we can make sure that fire will not be spread here. One of the examples for segmentation is the submarine example. In submarine, we have many rooms, and if one of these rooms got hit by a torpedo or something like this, this area will be isolated from the submarine. So the water flood will not impact the whole submarine. That's what do we mean by segmentation.
Defense in depth is a cybersecurity design strategy that involves the implementation of multiple layers of security controls. The goal of defense in depth is to compensate one control in case if it failed, so another control will be there in order to counter the risk that could be resulted from this missing control. The idea of defense in depth is to create multiple barriers. So when the attack comes, the attacker will need to bypass all of these barriers, because if it managed to bypass one of these barriers, another barrier will present and need to be bypassed as well. This will make the attack more difficult, and the attacker will have less likelihood for successful attack or successful compromising for the system. The layers related to defense in depth strategy, when we apply a defense in depth strategy, or in other words, the layered security concept while we are implementing the security control, consist of different layers. Example of these layers is the physical security. Physical security could include measures such as the security cameras, access control system, and security guards to prevent the unauthorized physical access to the facility. The second layer is the network security. These include firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention system, and other security controls that are related to preventing the unauthorized access to the network. Third layer is the application security, and these include measures that secure the software applications. What do I mean by measures that secure the software application is something such as the secure code review to make sure that the software code does not include vulnerabilities. Penetration testing, which is organized testing for testing the exploitation of system vulnerabilities. Any system or application could have some security weaknesses or security vulnerabilities. By having penetration testing performed from time to time, I will be able to bring someone to test these vulnerabilities for me and provide me a report that include which kind of vulnerabilities I have and which of them is subject to be exploited by threat actors. This can provide more assurance, by the way, in order to gain assurance about the internal security measures implemented in my application level. The fourth level or the fourth layer in the defense in depth is data security. In case application got compromised, for example, and data got leaked, I will be able to be assured that if the hacker managed to leak the data, this data will be encrypted. So even data got leaked, the hacker will need to invest a lot of time actually in order to decrypt this data. Data backup also could be one of the examples of data strategy. Like in this case, or in the case of attack, I will be able to restore back the data that I got lost due to the security incident because I have data backup. That's why data backup is part of the defense in depth strategy and part of the data security measures. Personal security, this could include the security measures that I am targeting to ensure that my employees are having it. For example, security awareness training for employees, background checks. These measures can help in increasing the security awareness and also reduce the likelihood of having one of the malicious insiders inside my organizations. So this is a concept of defense in depth or layered security. The main goal of defense in depth is to make sure in case control failure occur, there will be a compensating or there will be another control that in place to prevent the attack from occurring. I hope this concept was clear for you and see you in next lecture.
Our next topic is ISC squared code of ethics. And basically, code of ethics is something that you need to comply with while you are applying for the certification. In ISC squared code of ethics, we have some mandates and we have some requirements that aims to build a trust and confidence in the information security profession and contribute to the common good. The first statement in code of ethics is to protect the society, ensure that common good will be achieved, necessarily public trust and confidence to be maintained, and the infrastructure to be secure. So we need, according to code of ethics, our job is to protect the society and make sure that we are building digital systems or information security systems that ensure the public trust and confidence in the infrastructure and in the security infrastructure. Acting in an honorable manner, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally is also one of the mandates or one of the code of ethics statements in the ISC squared code of ethics. Provide diligent and competent service to principals, to people who are interested or the stakeholders that benefit from our business. We need to provide them with a competent service. We need to maintain the reputation of our profession. We should not do something that is illegal, or we should not do something that is illegal or that can subject our profession to discrimination or something from that context. And finally, advance and protect the profession by performing continuous education, increasing the level of your knowledge. And this is basically what do we mean by the ISC squared, the code of ethics. So we need to agree and we need to acknowledge this code of ethics as part of ISC squared certification process. So whether you are applying for CC, you are applying for CISSP, you are applying for CSSLB, you are basically required to acknowledge and read and agree to this code of ethics. And code of ethics can subject to be changed at any point of time, so it is better always to refer back to this link on the screen, which can give you information about if there is there any updates or something from the context. So this is ISS squared, the code of ethics, and this is our topic or last topic in this domain.
Information system management. Information system management is responsible for ongoing support for the organization, computer, and information system environment. It plays a critical role to ensure that computer and IT infrastructure and processing infrastructure are complying with the business requirements. Users are satisfied and information is processed securely. So the goal of information security management or information system management is to make sure that our systems are working according to the requirements, it meets the availability requirements, and end users are satisfied as the system is behaving normally and responding to their requisites. Also, information are processed in a secure manner. The information system management team or the management function of the information system infrastructure are responsible for planning, building, and running and monitoring the activities that aim to align with the direction set by the governance body in the organization. If we can remember the difference between governance and management, we can recall that governance are responsible for setting the direction, while the information system management are responsible for making sure they are building and managing the internal and day-to-day operations in order to meet the directions set by the management. Management is the responsibility of the executive management under the leadership of the chief executive officer. So the management of information system are usually the responsibility of CIO, Chief Information Officer, or the IT Director. And the information system management has the overall responsibility for all operation within the IT departments. So the key functions of information system operation is to ensure that computer processing requirements are met, end users are satisfied and the information are processed in a secure manner, and outside parties, including third-party cloud computing contractors and so on, are meeting the company processing requirements. You might have a situation where portion of your services are outsourced to a cloud service provider, for instance. So you need to make sure as an information system manager or part of the IT management team that this third party or this cloud computing provider are providing to us the level of service as agreed upon in our contractual agreement and contractual requirements. As a quick refresh for information system governance main objective is to ensure that the stakeholders' needs, conditions are evaluated and determined to be balanced and agreed on enterprise objectives to be achieved. Information system governance are also responsible for setting the direction, and the overall governance responsibility is the responsibility of the board of directors. Specific governance responsibility may be delegated to special organizational structure at an appropriate level, particularly in large complex enterprise. For example, if we need to govern our sustainability or govern our risk management process, we can delegate the governance related to risk management approach across the organization to the chief risk officer, for instance. So, in our effort toward establishing a service management or establishing a resilient information system management in our organization, we might rely on the publicly available, or we might rely on a huge set of service management framework. For example, in order to build an IT infrastructure or build an information system operation, you need to have people, process, and technology. So, in the sake of defining what are the processes required, you might rely on the ITIL framework, IT Infrastructure Library. And the ITIL framework is a reference body of knowledge for service delivery good practices. So, assuming that you need to have or establish the service strategy. So, in ITIL framework, we have service practices for the service strategy. You need to establish process regarding the service design. In ITIL, you can find information related to release management, for example, which can help you in the service design or service transition. If you are keen to establish a resilient system or a resilient service operation practices such as a help desk ticketing system, incident management, and so on, in that case you might also rely to ITIL. In ITIL framework, we have a lot of service practices that can be useful, and you can find many information in the ITIL framework that can guide you for how to adopt and integrate these services in your internal infrastructure or in your organization. Like, for example, in ITIL, there is a service practice related to introducing the changes to the system. So this is an example for the change management, or one of the examples in this case will be the change management. So ITIL framework gave you the guidelines about how to establish a change management process in your organization. The main objective of ITIL is to improve the service quality to the business. This is the main objective. And instead of reinventing the wheel while you are establishing your information system governance structure, you can rely on a framework such as ITIL to provide you with the roadmap that you can rely on. In addition to ITIL, we have a very well-known ISO standard known as ISO 20000, and this ISO standard is concerned about the information technology and service management. And as part of this ISO 20000 standard, we have an objective of improving the service quality and achieving the standard certifies organization as having passed auditable practices and the process in IT service management. So the main objective of the ISO 20000 is to make sure organizations has like a baseline or a criteria that they will be evaluated against it in order to make sure they have the requirements that make them certifying against the ISO 20000 standard. And the ISO 20000 standard could have a lot of common points between it and the ITIL framework. So all of this framework or all of these standards are providing the common body of knowledge or providing like a common agreement that agreed between professionals working in the field of information system management or IT management. So you will find a huge interaction and a huge commonality between ITIL, for example, and the ISO 20000 and many other frameworks that can serve you while you are developing your service management framework. I hope that was clear and see you in next lecture. As IT governance is very important topic, information security governance is also a very important topic. The goal of information security is to provide safeguard for information assets and handle the information risk in efficient manner. So what is the different types of information risk? We have a lot of information risk. We have risks that could be related to the confidentiality of information or integrity or the availability of the information. So by implementing a framework for governing the information security, we can help the organization in taking the advantage of IT adoption and using the IT technologies while mitigating or keeping the information risk as low as possible. Information security risk management is part of the governance of information security. Information security, in order to be implemented, it should be based on information security strategy. And the strategy should take into the consideration what is the business strategy. So as we mentioned before, for any department in the organization, whether this department is IT or the information security, they should have a strategy. And this strategy should be influenced and aligned completely and prove its strategic alignment with the organization strategy at any point of time. And based on the information security strategy, security program will be developed, and the goal of this security program is to achieve the alignment of the business strategy. So we need to identify the security strategy because based on it, we will identify the policy, and based on the policy, we will identify the architecture, and based on the architecture, we are going to select the control. So security program main goal is to ensure that the strategy of business is considered, and there should be a committees in the organization that are responsible for governance of information security the same way we have for IT. So as we have IT steering committee and IT strategy committee, we should have information security committee and risk committee, which will be responsible in discussing the different problems or different matters that are related to the information security issues and how to counter information security problems in effective manner. Welcome back again, and in this video we are going to explain policies, standard and procedures. So policies and standard and procedures are all considered as governance tools. It used to govern the internal operation and process inside the organization. That's why we call policies and standard and procedures as governance tools. So policies and standard and procedures also has a great benefit in information system auditing because it can provide the auditor with information related to what he is or what she is trying to find or what she is trying to look for. So when we review the policy, it can present to us what is the basis or what is the compliance requirements that we need to audit on the system. Policies generally reflect the management intention. It should be created for each function or for each process to govern this process and ensure this process is aligned with the governance criteria. Like, for example, if you have an information security function in the organization, you need to create an information security policy to govern how information is treated in a proper way in a proper manner. If you have a procurement, you need to consider creating a policy and procedures that govern the procurement process. And of course, each company has an information security requirements and procurement standard or procurement policy or procedures that is required. Policies in general define the acceptable behavior. It should speak in a high level using a simple language that can be understandable for the wide range of audience that this policy is trying to communicate to. Policy sets the tone of the organization as it reflects management intention. Policy document should be signed and approved by the highest level of management, such as the CEO or the one of the managers who have executive or who has executive level or executive authority on the organization. And generally, in each policy statement, we should have a mandate, and this mandate should be written in a clear and in a simple language. Policy document defines the responsibility and support the goals which is stated in the overall strategy for the department and the organization. And when we develop a policy and when we enforce a policy document in the organization, we need to make sure that this document or this policy is subject to regular review. So at least we need to review the policy every year to make sure that policy requirements are still aligned with the governance requirement and the strategy requirements. And the policy should not be kept as a secret. It should be communicated to the audience, should be available over a communication medium that can be easily accessible by the employees and the policy audience. Like, for example, uploading the policy version or the latest version to SharePoint Drive or the SharePoint of the organization, which can allow the access for this policy document from wide range of audiences. If we have a policy requirements and for any reason we need an exception process to be performed, in that situation, the exception should be approved by the original approver. Or we might find in the policy that there is a statement that delegates the permission for the exception approval to another one other than the CEO who originally approved the policy, for example. Policies create the basis for introducing or implementing the controls. So if we have a control such as firewall, antivirus, web application control, or web application proxy, or file level encryption, all of these should be defined as part of policy requirements. So controls usually come after being enforced or come after being required by policy in the organization. For policy examples, we have a lot of examples for policies that we can find in today in organizations. For instance, we could find the human resource policy, which govern the human resource function and define roles and responsibilities and what are the rights of employees and what is the right process to conduct a specific activity related to HR. We have the IT service policy, which defines acceptable usage of IT service, support requirements, and all of this stuff. We have security policy, whether it is information security policy or physical security policy. It defines what are the measures that need to be taken or need to be considered by employees and the contractors and the staff in order to protect the corporate information. We have the access control policy, which govern and provide information about how to gain access to a specific resource. what is the process and approvals required. We could also find the vendor management policy, which is related to how to manage the agreements with the contractors and what need to be acquired from contractors before they submit their biddings in case they need to access or they need to submit a bidding or submit a financial proposal for a specific tender. This can be found in the vendor management policy along with other provisions that support the same purpose. We have the acceptable use policy, which govern how organizational resources and support services can be used. And we have also the code of conduct, which define what is the acceptable behavior of the employees in a general form or in a general way. So that was all regarding definition and introduction to what do we mean by policy. So policy, as a recap, is a document, and this document could vary in the scope. And the goal of the policy is to set the tone of the top management, define the acceptable and unacceptable behavior, and every control should have origin in the policy statement itself. Policy should be written in a simple language. It is a high level, and the compliance of the policy requirements is not an option. It is a mandatory requirement as long as you need to prove the alignment with the business strategy and the governance requirements. So right now we are explaining how actual policy document looks like. And in this particular example, we are exploring together human resource information security policy, which is a draft or which is a template that you can use for your organization. So the first thing that we will mention about policy is that it should be drafted in a corporate template or a corporate approved template. And in this template, we are expecting to see the document control information, which defines the organization, the title of the document, who is the author, what is the name of the file, which is or which department is the owner of this document, what is the subject, and what is the review date. One of the important aspects that the auditor need to verify regarding the security policy is to make sure that this policy is subject to regular review. Because if we do not have a regular review, this will be an indicator that there is no alignment between what is stated as a requirement in the policy and what is required by business as per the business strategy. If we do a revision or periodic revision to the policy or updates, we should be or we should find a revision history here, which indicate what is the revision date, who did the revise, and what is the previous version and description of revision or updates. We will also find a table related to document approval and document distribution, which indicate who are the audience or which departments or which business units that are going to receive this policy. So the overall format, by the way, should differ from organization to organization, but as a baseline requirement or a baseline criteria, we should have the document control section, and we should have the revision history, and we should have the approvals of the documents. Who are the approvers who approve this document statement or these policy statements? And inside policy, we will find information about what is purpose, scope, and how to apply the policy, as well as the key messages or policy statements. So, for example, here for the statements, we will have the policy statement, which are written in very high level format. We will find what is the purpose of this policy, what is the scope regarding the business processes, locations, and people who are impacted by this policy. We will also find information about how to apply the policy and how to, let's say, how to manage the exceptions related to the policy. We will also find in the policy information about who is responsible and who is accountable to make sure that this policy is really applied. And in some situations, we may find this is just the policy, and we can find another document that talk about how to apply the policy, which is the standard document, and we are going to discuss in the next section. So it is very important to realize that policies should be approved by the highest level of management should be periodically reviewed and should be communicated to the audience of the policy. And that's all regarding the policy. And as we mentioned, we have different types, and we have a lot of types actually for policies, but it is recommended to have as minimal number as possible inside the organization. So this can help us in doing proper maintenance for the policy documents and doing proper review in a timely manner. Acceptable use policy. An acceptable use policy, or AUP, is a set of rules and guidelines that define what is acceptable and not acceptable behavior for employees when using organization assets. The purpose of acceptable use policy is to ensure that employees use these resources in a responsible manner and in a way that protects the organization from security risks and legal liabilities. Usual components of acceptable use policy include the scope, and the scope should clearly define what IT resources are covered, including computers, networks, software, and data. Acceptable use and non-acceptable use. In this paragraph, the policy should describe the acceptable use of the organization's IT resources, and this will include guidelines on the appropriate use of email service, internet service, social media, and other communication tools. And for non-acceptable use, the policy should describe the prohibited use of the organization's IT resources and what are the activities that are prohibited. For example, downloading copyrighted materials, downloading illegal content from the internet, or use the organization's resources for personal gain. Consequences. In this paragraph, policy should describe the consequences of violating the acceptable use policy, including the disciplinary actions, termination of employment, and legal actions. The last section is acknowledgement, and in this section, the policy should require employees to acknowledge that they have read and understood the AUP and agree to comply with its terms. It is very important to have the acceptable use policy available for users and in a location that can be reached by the users. From time to time, organization should remind the users about clear disk policy and acceptable use policy and any policies that could impact user and require user to acknowledge it. This could include a yearly email that require users to acknowledge the policy and use something like the vote button in Microsoft Outlook, and using the vote button we can capture the consent of users after reading and acknowledging the policies. Using acceptable use policy and security policy and the clear disk policy can help our business and help the enterprise in getting the required assurance that end users are aware about their security responsibilities and they are or they will behave in a responsible manner. However, you cannot rely on that only. In addition to policies, you should have controls, and these controls will support you in enforcing the policies. I hope that was clear for you, and see you in next lecture. Clear disk policy is a set of rules and guidelines that require employees to keep their workplace clean, organized, and free of confidential or sensitive information. The policy aims to reduce the risk of sensitive data leakage or stealing or being accessed by unauthorized individuals. A clear disk policy typically involves the following requirements. No confidential information should be left on the disk or in open view. These include data written in a paper or appear on the desktop or on the computer screen. All documents and files should be stored securely when not in use. If you have a spreadsheet that includes confidential information, this spreadsheet should be protected by a password. This also need to be mandated in the clear disk policy. All removable media, such as USB drives, CDs, DVDs, should be stored securely. Computer screen should be locked or turned off when you are not on your desk. Desks and workspaces should be cleared at the end of each workday. No food or drinks should be left on desks. Why no food or drink should not be left on the desk? Because if they left on the desk, they might be spilled out, which can impact the electronic devices such as a keyboard or mouse or even the desktop computer. Clear desk policy is one of the security policies that usually maintained by organization, and the main goal of clear desk policy is to make sure no sensitive information will be left unattended either on the desk of the employee in his or her workspace or on the desktop screen. I hope that was clear for you, and see you in next lecture.
So similar to security or similar to policies, standards also is another governance tool. Standards is a medium level. It could be extra detailed and it is a technical document. It defines the requirements to ensure common understanding for the policy. So if the policy is stating that password should be strong, the standard should identify what is the meaning of strong, like what is the minimum number of characters and so on. So standards provide basis for measurement because it provides way for quantifying what is needed. So using a standard, we can measure because in standard, we provide the requirements. We have to follow the standard, so not following the standard is not an option. You should follow the standard. It is a mandatory. It is not an optional. So you need to follow the standard because if you do not follow the standard, that means that you are not following the policy because standard and policies are linked to each other. Standard tell you how to apply the policy requirements. Of course, standard is subject to change whenever the situation change. Like for example, if I got a new regulation, if I discovered that I should not rely on TLS 1.2, I should migrate or I should use TLS 1.3 as a baseline. In that case, I need to go to the standard anytime during the year, update the standard and release or publish the standard on the corporate internet and send a notification to the technical team that the standard has been updated. From now on, no new system should use TLS 1.2. Any new system should use the new version. And for existing systems, please do an assessment and start rolling out the change in no later than 3 months, for example. So standards usually are maintained by the information security department if we are talking about security standards, and it could need to be reviewed more frequently and more updated. We can have a standards update every few months. There is no issue because it is a deep detailed or a low level, not very deep or not very low level, but at least it includes the security requirements and includes some quantifiable requirements. So standards tell you what to configure, what to do, what to perform, what to follow, but the policy define to you what is needed. Standards and baseline are two different conditions. Baseline refer to the minimum security requirements or minimum requirements. So baseline is not like standard, by the way. Standard define what is required, but in some situations we might not be able to achieve what is required. So it will be like a baseline, and baseline define what is the minimum requirements that we need to follow. So an example for a standard is when we define the minimum password length. In that case, in policy, we mentioned that password should be strong and should be changed in regular or at regular intervals, while in the standard, we identified that minimum password length is 16 characters for administrators and 10 characters for non-administrators, should include upper, lower, and special characters, and must be changed every 90 days. Here we identified what should we do and how we align with the standard. So standards provide measurement for compliance and set the security baseline, reflect acceptable risk and control objective, and act as a criteria for evaluation and should be unambiguous, consistent, and precise. So we might rely on different types of standards in our organization. We might have like a software development standard. We might have a dedicated standard for network security or a dedicated standard for access control, as well as configuring operating systems. We might have different standards that is tailored to different type of technology, or we might have a single standard that include all required information. We can also rely on third-party standards such as requirements of PCI DSS, CIS controls, Center of Internet Security, FIPS 140-2, SANS top 20 critical security controls, cloud control metrics. All of these global or all of these international standards can be used to help you to create your own standard. So for example, if CIS controls mention that this kind of encryption protocol is not recommended, in that case, you can take the recommended version or the recommended encryption protocol and include it in your standard. So basically, your security standard should include what is agreed upon or what is best practices that is used by multiple organizations. And as we mentioned, baseline is a minimum level of security and define the minimum level of security requirements that can help organization to include basic security controls in its system. And a security standard, on the other hand, may include additional controls that is exceeding the concept of baseline. So this is the idea of standard and baselines. I hope it is clear for you.
So we have discussed what do we mean by policies and what do we mean by standards, and we have seen some practical examples for both policies and the standards. What about procedures? So procedures is a low-level document, while standard was a medium level and policies was a high level. What do we mean by the level here is the level of details that is explained and discussed in these documents. So procedures is a low-level document because it provides step-by-step information with detailed information about how to do a certain activity or a certain task. And usually procedures give you information about how to apply the standard. Like you need to create a strong password. In the procedures, we will give you information in step-by-step format about how to create a strong password. It implements the original intent of the policy. So policy was requiring a strong authentication. In that case, standard required or defined what is the criteria of marking or defining authentication as strong, and procedures will help us in implementing this in effective manner or in practical way. So procedures are technology specific. It could be related to a specific vendor or could be related to a specific technological solution. So if this solution or if this technological vendor got replaced, this will make the original or will make the procedures document subject to be completely removed from the records, because as the technology change, this can bring the procedures document to end of life because it will not be more effective or it will not be more usable. So if the way of doing the task has been changed, then in this case the procedures will be changed. And as the standard defines the as the policy defines the requirements from general point of view, as and the standard define how to or define what is required to achieve the policy requirements, and procedures in turn define how to achieve the standard requirements and apply it. In that case, compliance with the procedures is not optional, it is also mandatory. And as long as you need to comply with the policy, you need to comply with the standard. And as long as you need to comply with the standard, you need to comply with the procedures, because procedures give you information about how to do the thing in a right way, how to do the required activity in a manner that will be acceptable by the policy requirements. So we can have a lot of procedures that are usually created by the control owner, and these procedures need also to be reviewed by the control owner. So it is related to technical people, and we can find procedures, for example, discuss how to set up a new virtual machine, how to set up a new firewall access rule, and how to harden the system or harden the database and apply secure configurations on database or a new system before introducing it to the production environment. So all of that are examples for procedures. One important point of view here that you need to understand, and one important information that you need to know, that the creator of policy document is usually the information security if it is security related, the physical security if it is related to physical security, or the safety department if it is related to safety, or HR department if it is related to HR, and it should be approved by the highest level of management across the organization. And this level of management should have executive leadership and should have executive authority on all employees inside the organization. So the best person to approve the policy is not the CFO, for example, if we have the CEO in place, which stands for Chief Operation Officer. And when we need to choose between the Chief Operation Officer and Chief Executive Officer will supersede the Chief Operation Officer. This is regarding to the policy. The one who created is the department that will benefit from this policy, but the approval should be the senior management. But for the information security standard or network security standard or technical standard, it could be created by the operational department like IT, and can be approved by the CIO or the one who manages this department, or can be approved as well from management. But as it includes a lot of technical details, it would be better to approve it, or it would be better to read it, or it would be better to write it from a department that is, let's say, more subject matter expert regarding what is written in these requirements. For procedures, it should be created by the control owner, and it should be also, as we mentioned, it can be superseded if we completely change the technology or change it how we are doing the task. Another document that can be also exist in the organization and can help us in enforcing the governance is the guidelines document. And the guidelines generally provide extra recommendations, and it is not mandatory to follow unless we do not have a clear standard to follow. So, for example, we can have a strong password requirements as per the policy, and the standards define what is the criteria of strong password. Um, but in some situations, I may create a strong password, but this password is strong in terms of compliance with the standard, but actually this password can be easy guessed password. So in that case, I can add a recommendation or add in my guidelines best practices for how to choose a policy. Like password should be strong, should not be able to be guessed by anyone but you. So document control and version and all of that stuff need to be considered also for guidelines, and this is information that you need to know, by the way, regarding guidelines. So guidelines usually define what is the best practice to be followed. Like as we mentioned, password need to be easy to be remembered by the password owner and hard to be guessed by the other users. And in order to achieve compliance with your organization requirements, you need to understand that the culture difference and mindset regarding guidelines, because some companies may treat certain guidelines as operational standards. That's all regarding procedures and guidelines information that you need to know from the perspective of exam and from the perspective of real life information.
So our next topic is laws and regulations and compliance. And in this section, we will get like an overview about what is different types of laws, what do we mean by regulation, and what is the key security regulations and the standards related to data security and privacy and so on. So Criminal law is a law or branch of the law that deal with the prosecution of individuals who have committed crimes against society, and it involves the definition of crime offenses and the investigation and prosecution in criminal cases and the punishment. All of these are covered in the criminal law. So the goal of criminal law is to keep society safe, and the penalties in the criminal law could include community service, fines, prisons, and it is enacted or applied through legislations or the police or enforcement authority. And in order to establish a criminal law case, you need to have a clear evidences. Cybersecurity threats or attacks might be treated under the criminal law perspective. So that's why, for example, you need to have clear evidences in order to establish law suite about the cybersecurity in the context of criminal law. Another type of law is the civil law, and the civil law is another branch of law that deals with the dispute between individuals or organizations. So, civil law govern a wide range of legal issues such as contracts, property rights, personal injury claims, and family law matters. In civil law, the monetary damage is one of the aspects of civil law because in civil law we are basically deal with the financial penalties or deal with the monetary damage that could impact the organization or individual. So civil law is enacted through also the legislative body or the legal authorities. Another type of law is the administrative law, and administrative law is about policies, procedures, and regulation, and it governs the daily operation of an entity, and it is enacted by governmental agencies, not the legal authorities. And example for administrative law could be laws that are related to labor or something like this. So for laws that are related to computer crime, we have Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, and it is a federal interest computer. This is the scope of this law, and it is about accessing classified information without authorization, performing frauds or malicious damage. And the scope is any computer used by government, financial institution, and interstate offenses. And it does not apply to violating websites term of use. So this is the scope of Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Another law that is related to computer crime is the National Information Infrastructure Protection Act, and it is another law that is concerned about computer crimes. We have also some other acts that are applying in the cyber crime space, such as FISMA, which is a federal act that enforce the need for periodic risk assessment, development of security policies and plans, making sure that these plans or are up to date and aligned with security requirements, training. Federal Information System Monetization Act is another law that is applied in US as well. We have Cybersecurity in Enhancement Act, and this also another kind of computer crime or law related to computer crime. So the CFFA, thank you for the correction. It is applied to any computer connected to the internet in United States, and so this is the kind of laws that might be applicable or might be related to computer crime space or govern how computer systems or how cybersecurity to be implemented in federal organization or in civil organization in United States. So another kind or another aspect related to laws and regulations is data protection, or let's say the kind of data protection mechanism or the intellectual property aspect. So intellectual property is a kind of brand or a kind of properties that differentiate the data or protect the data or protect the right of author for the data to use this data and benefit from this data, for example. And we have a lot of examples for intellectual property, such as copyrights, which is about protecting the original work of authorship. and it protects the authorship rights even after this author get deceased by 70 years, for example. And for companies, copyright can protect the data up to 120 years after creation of company and 95 years once published. Example for copyrights is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Trademark is another kind of intellectual property, and it protects the word, slogan, logos, and any criteria or any thing that can identify the company or product or service. And it provide like we have the TM icon, and we have the registered icon. And registered icon, for example, can protect the trademark for 10 years issuance since issuance. And this is a trademark. For patent is another kind of intellectual property, and it provides rights for the inventor. So if we have a company that invented a new technology, they might have patent for solely use this invention or use these features in these products only. And it can give you a protection, or can give the organization the opportunity or possibility to use this feature or use this invention for 20 years protection from the date of filing. And the patent must be something new, useful, and non-obvious. Trade secret is another kind of intellectual property, but it is not protected by legal regulation or any kind of this. Organizations need to apply its own security measures in order to protect the trade secret, and this can be enforced using information or using confidentiality controls and so on. And we have an act that is related to trade secret known as Economic Espionage Act, and it is about stealing a trade secret to benefit a foreign government or stealing trade secret in general from US companies. So for licenses, software or applications or any kind of features that we are using in organizations need to be licensed, and we have multiple kind of licenses, such as contractual license agreement, which is a legal agreement between a software vendor and the user that govern how software can be used. We have the shrink wrap license, and it is a kind of license type or license agreement that is included in the software that is purchased in a physical package. So we will have like a license that allow us to use this software. We have click-through license agreement, and in click-through license agreement, it is a type of license agreement that is presented to the user when they download or install software. So when you click, you can go to the purchase, and then you can acquire your license. We also have another kind of license known as cloud service license agreement, and it is a type of agreement that governs the use of cloud-based services. So licenses, of course, also can be differentiated based on if it is open source license or proprietary license related to a certain company. And proprietary licenses can be counted or can be granted based on the number of users, the number of CPUs, number of sites that can benefit from this software or this application. We might also have an enterprise license that will cover all employees as long as they are working under the same organization or under the same domain. We also might have some other laws and regulations and controls for the import and export, especially for sensitive information or sensitive technologies, such as in the domain of encryption or in the domain of the encryption technologies. We have a maintained list for countries of concern where we cannot sell to them or share with them some technologies, because these technologies might be used in some illegal or some activities that is not in the interest of the original creator of this technology. For privacy regulation, we have a lot of privacy regulations that we have discussed so far, and all of these regulations has something in common between all of them, which is the care for how to protect the PII or how to protect the personal health information, or in general to protect the data related to consumers. So we have privacy regulations that might be applied in US. We might have privacy regulations that is applied in European Union. Before having the GDPR in Europe, there was a legal regulation for privacy known as European Union Data Protection Directives. And after then, when GDPR come to the scene, it superseded or replaced this regulation. So in GDPR, for example, we have some requirements like the notification requirements after 72 hours from data breach, or when the data breach become known to the company, they need to report to the supervisory authority, which is one of the stakeholders according to the GDPR requirements. GDPR or privacy regulation also gave the right for data subjects for allowing them to access and download a copy from their data, and the right to be forgotten. We also have some other privacy requirements that could, or privacy regulations that might be applicable in other countries, or state specific privacy regulations such as the CCPA and the Canadian privacy law. So as the legal and regulatory requirements are very huge and governing everything right now, there should be a process for identifying legal and regulatory requirements and evaluate these requirements according to risk point of view and according to whether our organization need to really comply with these requirements or not. This may require a full-time compliance staff and also might require some support from other departments in the organization, such as the legal department, to give the security compliance team information about the changes in legal requirements and any modifications that might change how systems are managed or governed inside the organization. So this was like an overview about what is the key laws and regulations and computer-related crime laws, privacy regulation, as well as the type of licenses related to software and intellectual property from the context of our training.